Oh man, I mean my favorite dad joke is probably, how do you know when you're being told a dad joke? And that's when the punchline becomes apparent.
Oh. That's awful. Matt Fawcett is an extraordinary man, but don't just take my word for it. You don't know him yet, but someday, God willing, you will. And even if it's just the conversation you get from today's show, well, that would be enough. Matt is a perfect example of what happens when kindness mixes with ambition. And what I find immensely hilarious and interesting is our conversation was supposed to be about his musical career and his pursuits as a performer and songwriter. But man, once we got going, I found that what Matt had to say about life and our immediate impact into those we love stood out as far more important and immediate. This is my interview with the soon-to-be legend, Matt Fawcett, on the Rockstar Superhero Podcast. So let's get rolling here, Matt. Hey, I'm so stoked to have you on the show. This is really, really special for me. We had a chance to connect on Twitter, which seems absurd, but nowadays it's like everybody I know is meeting amazing people online or through text. The world has changed so much. And, the sort of the day of the grip and grin and the formal face-to-face introduction is kind of long gone, right? The world is smaller because we're on the web all the time. And there's not necessarily that much information out there about you, with the exception, of course, of your website and obviously your music, which we'll get to in a bit. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to start with the most obvious question, which is what I do on virtually every show I do, which is a question about life beginnings because it applies to everybody.
Yeah.
So, did you grow up in a positive family environment? Were your parents artistic? Were they driven? Were they both? Did they impress themselves on you? How would you define your childhood, and where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest, actually in southern Ohio, which I can get away with saying that with most people, but my wife, who is from actual southern Ohio, thinks I grew up in central Ohio. But my it was a very positive upbringing. My parents were very encouraging of us as kids. We got involved with a lot of things. We were involved in 4-H and sports in school, art, music, choirs. We were involved in our church a ton too. Mm-hmm. And I remember like our parents were, or my parents were very supportive of what we were interested in. So I wanted a guitar when I was a kid. It took them a while to figure out whether or not I was serious about it, which is fine. I mean, I grew up with 3 sisters, an older sister, a twin sister, and a young sister.
Oh, that has to be hard.
Yeah. So I was the only boy in the family other than the dog.
Oh, my.
And I think we had one cat, which I don't know. Cats and I never get along very well anyway, so it didn't really count.
Sure.
But it was really fun growing up because we were all involved in different things. And even though we went to a really small school, honestly, like my sisters and I never really stepped on each other's toes. Even my twin sister, we were involved in a lot of the same things. Both she and I played on the same tennis team, and we're all involved in marching band at different times. And it was just, they're some of my best friends, which I know a lot of families can't necessarily say that there's more competition, but I think we all found our lane. Right. Pretty early on, to where it wasn't a competition as much. Now I'm saying that looking back with rose-colored glasses, but I think they would even admit to that too. Of all of us were never trying to outdo or outbeat the other one, or fight for our parents' affection, because mom and dad always looked at us as individuals, and tried to really dig into what made us individually unique. and allowed us to explore different things, as opposed to just saying, well, your brother's doing this or your sister's doing this, so you got to go that way. Mm-hmm. For all of us. So because my twin sister was brilliant, super, super smart, and I was book smart, just off the charts. Was valedictorian of our class. I think she got maybe 1 B on a report card, K through 12. Like
she quit.
I think it was on and it was on like an interim thing. And I just remember her coming home just distraught.
Really?
And I passed.
Sure.
I wasn't, a CD student. I was more like a BC with a couple of A's, being like gym class and band and art and that sort of thing. But, instead of that being a comparison, it was always just, they let her drive herself and knew that that's where she was driven. And for me, it was more sports and interaction with people and music. And they allowed me to really focus on those things and be driven, still, pushing me harder in areas that I needed to grow through school, but it never being, well, you're not as good as your sister.
Right.
And I think that's where I've heard a lot of kids' upbringings really gets them down and can really be destructive, is when parents don't see their kids as individuals. So I was super, super blessed to have parents that loved us enough to be able to see that, not all of us are going to be straight A students. And it was never the expectation. It was the expectation that you always did the best of what you could do.
Yeah.
At whatever you put your hand to. Even now, my older sister is a graphic designer. She worked for NASA for a while and now works for the government doing stuff. My twin sister is flying helicopters for the Marine Corps.
Wow.
My younger sister is a mental health therapist. And they all married fantastic men that are all very driven and excel in their different jobs as well. And so like our family was always, if you're going to do it, look good doing it, look good like you've been there before.
Right.
I remember my dad multiple times when we were playing soccer was the best thing you can do if you're going to go score a goal is pretend even if you're super, super excited inside, pretend like you've been there before, because nothing will strike fear in your opponents more than somebody who went down and scored and walked back like I'm about to do it again.
So true. It seems to me then your parents, clearly, come on, man, there's no way 4 individuals can be as driven and as, as motivated and as unique and clear in their identity if you didn't have parents that were the same. Sure, it's a nurturing household and there's a lot of power in that because clearly your parents allowed you to step into your identity, but they also sort of subversively said, hey, you better own your identity.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Because, my dad, he started his doctoral program. He's a college professor, and my mom works as head of the library at the university that they both serve at now. So they're both very driven in their careers, but I will say they never put their career above family. And I think that's probably the reason why we found ourselves so comfortable and confident in exploring who we were as individuals and doing different stuff. Because I remember even my dad going through his doctoral program, which he took from a university that was 3 hours away from where we were living. He never missed a soccer game. He may be sitting there with his notes out in front of him for when there were, not timeouts, but like halftime and that sort of thing and working on stuff. But he was always on the sidelines cheering for his kids. And so, he has a PhD. Actually, crazy thing was his doctoral dissertation was on the use of cell phones in communication and how that affects marketing, which is funny now because at the time cell phones were like everybody had they're growing out of the car phones and there was like one cell phone per family. And it was like, all right, who's going the furthest distance away from somebody and they're the one who takes the phone.
Right.
And now it's like everybody's got a cell phone. So
yeah. And you didn't put a cell phone between your legs either because you wanted to have kids someday.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You didn't want to get zapped and all of a sudden not be able to, grow an extra arm or something like that because it was too close to you. So you always had to have it in a purse or a bag or something like that.
Yeah, a lead-lined purse.
Yeah, exactly.
So you said a magic 4-letter word that really resonates with me, and that's twin.
Yeah.
I have twin boys, and so
awesome.
So yeah, thanks. I have 6 children, and I really ended on a bang with the twins. They're 7 now, and that it's one of those things where if you had told me when I was 25 I was going to have 6 kids, first of all, I would have told you you're a madman, and second of all, I would have done everything I could to change my life that would never occur. And yet, ultimately you learn that children, it sounds so almost vomitous, right? It's one of those things where if you're a hard charging adult, the last thing you need are, and I don't want to call children distractions, but the last thing you need are these things that sort of pull up an immense amount of energy out of you. Right? Because, you want to be focused on what you want to be focused on. You want to be clear. You have a legacy to create, right? Basically, that's how the artist thinks anyway. And, so having children like that is really, really amazing and challenging and awful and beautiful all at the same time. So all this being said, clearly you're not identical because there's one of each sex. But So one, who's first, meaning, who was born first, and do you feel that there's an identity in that who was born first aspect? And secondly, do you feel like you're one human cut in half?
That's an interesting question. So the easy one is, so she was born first, 8 minutes ahead of me. And we were reminded she reminded me very often that she was always the older twin. She also grew faster than I did as a female, just height-wise. So my dad used to always tell her, you better be careful and not beat up on your brother, because there will be a day where he's going to be taller than you and you're not going to catch him. And I don't even remember what we were arguing about or anything, but she was mad at me for something or trying to make a point, and she turned around and tried to look me in the eye and had to look up. And immediately, whatever the argument it was, stopped. And she just said, oh, no. And I just smiled and walked away. Yeah. And my dad was sitting right there. He's like, yep, see. And the funny thing was, and again, I don't remember what we argued about. It was something silly. But, she's always been the oldest twin. And I guess on some level, there's some identity with that. I mean, we used it just to go after each other a little bit. Or she would use it as kind of like a step up type thing, but it was we never did that outside, to where, I'm the older one, so I need to make the decision.
Sure.
If it was between her and I, we'd go at it a little bit. But we would never use that as like a step above for anyone else. Like, we were really protective of our relationship as being twins. And the funny thing is, some people will ask, well, what's it like being a twin? I'm like, I don't know. What's it like not being one?
Right.
That's just what I grew up with. That's who I am. And as far as being the same human being cut in half, she and I definitely think on very similar wavelengths, to where it is pretty interesting. There were times, and there's not very many of these, but there were a couple of times where, when we were younger and staying at my grandma's house, we were sleeping in the same bed, and in our dream we were in elementary school, and we used to pass around cards to sign for kids who had birthdays that day or whatever. So, and I remember my dream sitting in the class, and granted at that time we were in the same class, getting the card, signing it, and then passing it off to her. And when we woke up the next morning, I was talking about the dream that I had, and she's like, oh, that's funny. I had the same dream that you were passing the card off to me. So again, there were a couple of times that were like that. We still do this to this day on some level. We talked about how I won't celebrate our birthday until she and I are together the next time. Now through college, that was difficult, and because she went to the Naval Academy, so we were never together on our birthday. But that was just, for me, that was something special. It's we always shared this day, so I'm just going to wait until you're around, and then we'll share it together. And we never did some crazy birthday bash. It was just more of a mental thing for me of, hey, next time we're together, we'll just celebrate that.
Yeah.
Because it always felt weird not having her around growing up for the first, all throughout high school. We always shared birthdays together. So we'd have joint birthday parties where I'd invite 8 guys over. She'd invite 8 girls over, and it was always a part of what we did. So I don't know if that's part of like the identity type thing of like we did a lot together. Our parents allowed us to embrace that. You are twins, but we had a good relationship enough to where it was a part of our identity, but it also meant that we didn't have to do everything together. Like there were still things that she would go and do. Like 4-H camp was one of those, to where she went to go be a counselor at 4-H camp, and I wasn't super interested in it at that point in time, so I didn't. And then like the next year or so, like I ended up joining up and doing that at the same time, but she still had her group of friends. Like, granted, going to a smaller school, we had very similar friend groups, but it was never hostile to the point where, we could share the same friends and not have to worry about who was spending more time with her, who liked who, because we were just different enough to, still have people that we spent more time with than others.
Yeah, that's great. There's a couple of things about twins that I find really fascinating. Is one, especially when they're like you and your sister, when somebody asks the silliest question known to man, which is, "Are you identical?" That just kills me. Because I know it's happened to you. It happens to every twin, and I'm like, do you see certain features that are slightly different?
Yeah, we're slightly different.
Yeah, just slightly. but there's a really fascinating thing that maybe you've never considered, but it's something that was told to me by our doctor when when my wife was pregnant with our twins.
Yeah,
is twins are typically sitting inside the womb, in a sort of a yin and yang position, right? One is pointed up, one is pointed down, and typically the one pointed down is the one that comes out first, right? Baby A and baby B. And yet the one that is usually in a position of what I would call birthright authority, the second baby is in a position where their butt is kind of in the face of, now I know this sounds weird and I'm not trying to be gross, but what I'm getting at is there's this sort of strange subconscious thing that says, I'm first, but you're always going to be kind of sticking it to me, right? Because my oldest twin is 30 minutes apart, and he is the softest, sweetest little boy. But his younger brother was the one in the womb who had his butt shoved in my older one's face. And there was this joke that, he's already showing him who's boss. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because he really does tend to be the bossy one. And to them, even though we've been told they're not identical, they absolutely, to me, from a distance, impossible to tell apart. The only way you can tell them is one is slightly thicker, a little denser, if you will. But they look so much alike, and yet they are, like, their personalities are cut in half. One is super mellow, the other is super intense, and so for you guys, it sounds like you're both sort of quietly intense people. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's definitely probably a fair assessment, because even, thinking about our work environments now. So she is an officer in the Marine Corps. You can't do that and be super gentle or passive.
No, definitely not.
She definitely leads with authority. Now, granted, she could command a room without saying a whole lot, just personality wise, because she's firm, but she's careful. She's not going to pick a battle or fight something that's not worth it. And I'd say I'm pretty similar in the way that, like, I definitely am probably more the jokester. Like, we both love to laugh, but my personality is probably a little bit more expressive than what hers would be. Although it would be, if we're both in at 50%, I'm probably like 60% that, where she would be like 40% that.
Okay.
So it is rather interesting, because both of us are definitely very driven, just in different aspects. For sure. But she could definitely command a room, and does quite often because she has to. And she definitely takes control. Now, some of that too is just our upbringing. we joke all the time that it's just part of being a Fawcett, that most of us struggle with being workaholics.
Yeah.
Because because we're driven family. My grandpa used to say, you do 100% of your job and 10% of somebody else's. You'll never have to work. You'll never have to find a job. It'll find you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just, everybody in our family was just hard workers.
Yeah.
Even like my aunts and uncles, there's, goodness, I don't know how many degrees between the 5 of them. I think there's like 7 different higher education degrees. I think at least 4 doctorates. Education was important to my grandpa. And so all the kids are highly educated and driven. And that got passed down to us. I don't know how many degrees my younger sister has now. She got half the alphabet after her name because of the stuff she's doing.
She has 12 Latin surnames.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But my older sister and I both graduated, actually one right after the other. She graduated the same school. We both had comm arts degrees. She graduated literally the person before me. So it was her name and then me, because we were both in the same degree program.
Right.
And she's 2 years older than I am. So it was kind of funny. She's like, well, still graduated before you did. I'm like, yep,
yeah.
You sure did.
Yeah. She had to win.
Yep. So, but even like my twin sister, she went to the Naval Academy, and if you basically, it's still a 4-year degree program. But if you pass all your classes and do enough, she literally was going for her master's degree for like the last year that she was at the 4-year degree. So she got a 4-year degree done, I think in about 3.5 years, and was already starting on her master's degree before she officially graduated, or left the academy, to go on to flight school.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's brilliant, super driven. And yeah, I'm pretty sure she has a license right now to fly anything that is in the air, which is kind of nuts, but
yeah. No, that's amazing. It's funny, you touched on a few things that I definitely want to hit on today. Obviously one is your, what you do, right? Obviously you have a job, and I'm not talking about that, but your artistic purpose,
Yeah.
And 2, I want to talk about something I call the artistics or the artist's dilemma. So we'll get there, but you did touch on a few things, which I can't wait to explore. Let me ask you this. You're a man of faith. Clearly you're a man of faith. You make it very clear online, and I love that because you own your faith. And that's obviously, it's very potent and very important, because regardless of one's spirit walk, and there's a lot of versions of faith out there, and it's not just Christian faith, right? There's a lot of faith, right, if you will. But you make yours very clear. What's a common theme in your life? Besides your spiritual walk?
Honestly, the thing that keeps coming up for me is servant or service. I've seen that, again, growing up. There were always opportunities where my family would serve others. We were driven to do things, but there were a lot of things that we did for free or just out of the goodness of our hearts. And I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've seen repeated over and over again, is no matter where I end up, or what job I end up in, or doing in the moment, there's always opportunities to be able to serve other people.
Yeah.
And I think that comes a lot into like the reason why I express and write music the way that I do, is to comfort the afflicted and confront the comfortable. A lot of times we just view service as doing things for others that they can't do themselves.
Yeah.
Which is true, but on some level, like even that definition of it, you can be really detrimental to somebody's health and well-being by just doing things for them, when really what you want to do is to help serve that individual the way they need to be served. So for some people, that's going to look like buying them a meal or giving them a car or, going and doing something at their house for them. For other people, it may be looking them in the face and be like, look, you're screwing this up. Like we really need to dive in deep and talk about this. And that's the more confronting the comfortable. I think most human beings are always trying to drive to do what makes them comfortable. Absolutely. Or where they feel safe.
Mm-hmm. What they want, really, when you get down to it. Unintentionally selfish, unintentionally narcissistic.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
What makes me feel good about my walk? Let me tell you more.
Exactly. And those, and it's good to find things that make you comfortable. And I don't think that we should just live completely uncomfortable lives. But in those times when that's all we're driving for and that selfishness, we're missing out on a lot of the goodness that we can give back to the world and that we can give to people.
Yeah.
Looking at Christ, like his life was not super posh and trying to find the latest and greatest of what's going on. He was there to serve other people. And as far as my faith and my belief in Christ is to go and do likewise, is to go and serve people. Which is, again, I think the downside of that is a lot of times we just look at service as being one dimensional in one aspect. Mm-hmm. Whereas we really need to look at it as trying to serve individuals instead of just, well, service looks like this. And so if I just go and do that a million different times, it's like the difference between playing chess and checkers. Checkers, every piece moves one space and it can only do what it does. Chess, every single piece has a purpose and a way that it can move and design. If we look at people as just checkers, we're always just going to treat them as they can only move this way and that's it.
Yep, and you can only jump over them.
Yeah, exactly. And you end up basically, hitting 80% most of the time, whereas relationship is looking at people where they have a designated purpose. They were created on purpose, and they're going to move differently, metaphorically in this life, but they need to be seen as their individual person, and serve them as what they deem actually helpful, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, okay, I'm going to go serve this person. I'm going to serve them like I want to be served.
Right.
Because it doesn't mean that is not going to be seen as love to people, because it's almost arrogance at that point in time on my part. If I'm just going to say, well, I'm just going to serve people this way. Well,
right.
Am I arrogant enough to think that people are just going to accept it the way that I would have?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I find I'm listening to what you're saying, and I tend to be pretty darn close to 100% in agreement. It doesn't mean that I disagree with what you're saying. And of course, what I'm trying not to do is inject my own stories into your story, right?
Yeah.
But something I've found really troubling and at the same time somehow comforting is that it's like I'm purposely trying to upset the world in my faith walk. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it's almost like I'm trying to be ugly in my walk to let other people know that it's okay to fail. It's okay to be loud and confrontational. It's okay to and I'm not saying it's okay to swear. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time saying, look, I'm a human just like you. The only difference between me and you is that, I have made this sort of this internal choice to follow in this direction, but also knowing clearly that it's almost impossible for me to follow in that direction and to own my humanity and to own my ugliness. And I like that you're saying that. I get it. You're not saying you are like that. And of course, I don't know you well enough to say, "Oh man, you should see Matt behind the scenes. He's a maniac." You know what I mean. But I think there's a real beauty because thinking about podcasting, for example, some of the most famous podcasts in the world are hosted by people who are really, really damaged people, and people want to hear that. They want to know they're not alone, right? It's the human's version of lowest common denominator. Most of the time, we go in the wrong direction because that's the easiest direction to go in. But it's so nice to know that somebody who is immensely famous or wealthy or has the things we think we want is completely damaged and broken.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of it too, is honestly, and that's how we view other people. We want everyone to give us grace for our mistakes, but we don't want to give other people grace for theirs.
Yep.
Which again, kind of blows my mind because again, I end up being in that same spot so many times too, to where I want everybody to give me grace because I'm not perfect and I haven't made it there, but I want everybody else to be perfect because they haven't made it there either. again, it's just, that's our brokenness, where we want to think the best of ourselves and have everybody else, we can see the worst in them because somehow that gives us a leg up, which is not, that's the brokenness coming out in our arrogance to try to get ahead of people, when really, I think that's the beauty of servanthood, or looking at people as people to be served.
Yeah.
Is it automatically has to bring us back to humility. Because if I'm constantly trying to jump ahead of people, I'm not going to have a mindset of how can I love this person or how can I serve this person. I'm just always thinking of how can I tear them down enough to get ahead of them. Whereas if I look at people as individuals to be loved and cared for and to serve,
right,
then it gives me an opportunity to again, put myself in their shoes and be like, yeah, we're all broken. I have not succeeded in life of becoming perfect. And honestly, like, of course, I'm going to try to present myself in the best light, but I fail daily. Every single day I fail in some way, shape, or form. And it's not the same way every single day. But with as much grace as God's given me to be able to continue to breathe, I should be willing to give other people that same grace.
Yeah.
And realize, I mean, he loves us at our worst. Why can I not love people in the same way, in the same manner, of knowing that, you know what, like my goal and my objective in life, and I think this, and you may think the same way, I'm not sure if you do or not, but like a lot of times Christianity, because we say, or we're being told a lot, you know, Jesus is the answer, we assume that we just want to slap Jesus on everybody and then we can walk away and be done with it.
Right. It's not our problem anymore.
Right. You're like, I told you about Jesus. You now have the answer. So good luck.
Yeah. I'll be praying for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
I hate that.
Yeah. But even Christ himself didn't continually condemn people. He walked with people.
Yeah.
He was willing to work and live in relationship with people he didn't agree with and people who were still figuring it out. And you see that all throughout the Gospels with the disciples. They, you know, he didn't write them off as soon as they screwed up the first time. In fact, multiple times they screwed up.
Yeah.
And he was still walking in relationship with them and reinstating them and continually trying to reinstate. I think that's the biggest thing that I think just globally Christianity could work on, is working on figuring out how to reinstate people and viewing it as a reconciliation faith walk instead of a you brought up cursing earlier, instead of a list of rules that we have to keep or else you're on the naughty list.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's a double-edged sword. There are, you know, we should do everything that we can to live holy and upright lives. But in that same breath, we are trusting the Holy Spirit to help guide us in that direction. And yet not, and knowing we're not there yet.
Yeah.
But we have to trust him to do the work in us, while at the same time having responsibility to do that, but then also realizing that if we trust in ourselves too much to where, we screwed up. Well, if I'm trying to earn my way, then that's not Christian faith at all. That's, and it's a weird catch-22 on some level. Like, we need to be open and emotional and understand that we are human beings that are broken. It's like me driving I used to have a Mercury Mountaineer, and at one point in time, for some reason, my sister's car was getting fixed. She had to drive 3 hours away. So I was like, well, you take my car. I can stay up here a couple of days, wait till it's fixed, then we'll switch back. So as we're switching keys, Dad's like, all right, tell each other about your cars so you have no surprises.
Smart.
I'm like, okay. Well, this window doesn't roll down. And when you pull the stick down and drive, it's actually, you got to be in reverse because that's where drive is, because it slid over. And, you know, make sure you don't do this. You know, it gets a little shaky. Like, yeah. Just a bunch of weird stuff, which to me, because I'm used to that car, was not stuff that I ever thought about. I'm used to walking in my own skin. But to her, she's sitting there like, is this safe? Like, oh yeah, it's totally safe. I drove it up here. Like, I think your car needs to go in the shop. But that's how we view humanity a lot of times, is I'm used to my own skin and I'm used to my experiences and my flaws. But when somebody starts being open enough to tell me what theirs are, my first gut reaction is, are you even safe to be around? Because you got tons of stuff going on.
Right.
But in reality, it's like, it's just different skin they're living in.
Yeah.
They're just a different human being.
Yeah. I think that's so great what you're saying. I really do believe in the pursuit, not just of Christ, but the pursuit of people. There's I don't want to say it's an old adage because it's not, but it's something that I sort of believe in. I've kind of created this not mnemonic phrase, but this way of just thinking about love. And, what happens a lot in the church, there's a lot of marketing.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of quoting directly. And even when it's quoted, of course, then there's somebody who says, well, that's an interpretation. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, it's impossible to be holy. And I would agree with you. It's impossible to be holy, but we should be pursuing, as you said, that life. And the difficulty is how do you walk forward with any, I don't want to say majesty, but with any hope of doing anything remotely close to what Jesus did when you're a cluster in pretty much all of the ways. You know what I mean? Because I'm ugly as a believer. I play disc golf. I think you've seen me talk about this online.
Yeah.
And I've really fallen in love with it the last 2 years, and I'm actually pretty good now. I'm not great, but I'm pretty good. But I have not competed in a tournament. And the reason I haven't is because when I go out by myself, if I throw anything wrong, which honestly, as I'm trying to grow in my abilities, I'm doing a lot of because I'm trying new ideas, techniques, and they're not working out. The first thing, I mean, it's not even like I considered it, is some curse word. The first thing, and it's loud. I'm in the middle, and it's almost like I'm in the middle of this park doing this thing. Because secretly, and I really truly believe this, Matt, secretly, I want attention. I want somebody to say, oh, he didn't mean to do that. Do you see what I'm saying? There's this sort of, again, unintentional narcissism that we do something, we know we screwed up, but we make it really loud so people go like, it's okay, Rob, try again. Right? Yeah. But it's not demonstrative of any sort of faith walk. And I would throw the disc, I'd curse, and then I'd walk to the disc. And while I'm walking to the disc, I just did this yesterday. I said, Lord, okay, I clearly have an untamed tongue, and this is a dangerous thing because I'm out of control. I mean, I'm an ex-Navy guy too, and I never swore in my life until I joined the Navy. And then it's like every other word is an F-bomb. I mean, it was just I don't know why it frees you up to speak like that. So I have this sort of trained into my body, and I've been out of the service over 25 years, but I still to this day just like it's the first thing. I'm not thinking it, Matt. I'm not saying, I can't wait to swear, but it's an automatic. I mean, an instant. How can you untrain yourself from that? And so I'm like, please, God, help me. I don't want to do that. And then I walk up and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be okay. And I grab my disc and I throw it. And if it's wrong, I instantly do it again. And it's like, then I find myself saying, look, are you listening to me? I need you to shift my brain because clearly I cannot do it myself. And I think that goes with everything. That's not just cursing. That's confronting the sexuality in ourselves, the lust and the flesh, because we're living in this place where we're looking for extreme satisfaction. We're not just looking to be in a place of comfort. We're looking to be overwhelmed with something that appeals to our flesh, our basest instincts, right? We want to be post-orgasmic in a sense, right? We want money to be overflowing. We want our love life to be overflowing. We want to be able to walk out into the community and show how much we care because we want to buy a Ferrari and then drive it to a small town and donate it so they can do something. I mean, and it's because it brings attention to us.
Yeah.
And it's like, where is Christ in that walk? And it's nowhere. And yet, if Christ were here today, I mean, we all say this, I'm sure, a million times. I'm sure everybody in the world has said this. If Christ were here today with social media, he would have been executed, 10 months into his ministry, not 3 years, And that might be true. But I really do believe in ugly mission work. I want to own my humanity, and clearly you're doing the same thing. Like you said, you want to confront the comfortable in yourself, not just in others.
Yeah.
And pursue a life. It doesn't have to look like, traditional mission work, let's fly to Bangladesh and dig water wells, right? But it is doing something that is truly purposeful. So all this being said, and me blabbing, what was the first step you took towards your personal purpose?
I think, honestly, it was just trusting that God didn't screw up. Because honestly, as a kid, it's trying to find personal identity and walking with him. There were multiple times where, like, my whole walk through education, I grew up in a college town, and didn't know what I wanted to do for the longest time. I literally didn't. So I was like, well, I'll just go to the college that my parents work at. It's cheaper doing it that way. I'll go there for 2 years, figure out what I want to do, and then from there, I'll decide what I want to do and then leave.
Right.
And, through high school, I wanted to be like a fighter pilot and, I wanted to be basically Tom Cruise and Top Gun. But who didn't? So, and honestly, like as I kept walking and doing things, it literally was just looking. I don't even want to say looking. It was allowing opportunities to fall in my lap and then just doing them. I'm reading a devotional this year that Bob Goff wrote. And a lot of it is, he wrote a book called Love Does. And this is kind of a daily reminder for me as he walks through different things of just the first step is literally just trying it and screwing up and knowing that screwing up is going to happen. Like you said, the stuff with the disc, I love playing disc golf too, which we'll have to get together sometime.
I'd love it.
Cause but we played, my brother-in-law, usually what happens if we screw up on a disc, you just grab another disc out of your bag and be like, well, let's see if this one's bad. And if that one's worse, then you feel better about the first time.
Right. 12 mulligans in a row.
Yeah. Like, well, all right, I'm just going to take the first one because that was obviously the best.
Yeah.
But with anything you do in life, you're not going to be the best the first time you do it. Like, now, granted, there are people who would call, we would say are prodigies, and they have good talent starting up front, but they also don't just rely on solely that talent. They still have to practice and they have to do things, and we have to be okay with failure being a part of the process.
Yes.
And I think that's the beauty of the gospel, is the fact that failure is already a part of the process. It's the first part of the process, is admitting that we can't do it and that there's no way we can attain what God requires of us. And we have to admit that we are already failed or dead in order to be able to accept the fact that someone else has already done it for us. And because of that, we can walk in the failures that we will have, knowing full well that the perfection in the perfected work is what we are trusting in Christ has already done for us. So going through college, like not really knowing what to do, like the first summer, everybody went and found jobs or went home. Well, I was already living in the same town I grew up in, which is a super small town in Southern Ohio. So I went and worked at camp as a camp counselor, and I loved it. It gave me an opportunity to be able to serve people. It was super, super hard. I did not make a ton of money whatsoever at all. Nobody gets into camp ministry to become a millionaire. Right. It's just not going to happen. And did that for 4 years. But then every spring break would literally fly to Mexico with a group of college students, and we would do camp ministry down there for a week. And it was crazy. We would leave the day before spring break at like 3 a.m. and then get back at 1 a.m. on the Monday classes started, or like 3 a.m. the day classes started. So spring break was always kind of a joke to us because we were literally running from before classes were over till classes started again on the opposite week, and running like crazy. And those were opportunities that God just allowed me to fall into on some level, because they weren't necessarily things that I was seeking out. I just had people in my life that were just like, yeah, you should look into this.
Yeah.
And I'd walk into it. And then I ended up being at camp for 2 years, full time after I finished college. And wanted to pursue music more, and got married, and then ended up in a sales job, selling musical equipment. And even in that transition, thinking, God, why was I in camp ministry serving people, which I love doing, but just didn't didn't work for our family to be able to make enough money to be able to really even just support my newly married wife. Like we just didn't have the ability to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And then coming to a job where having ends meet wasn't the problem anymore. It was now the time and feeling like I'd left my purpose. And music for me has been an outlet of feeling like I can still love on people, whether it's on stage or through a camera doing a Facebook Live, while still doing what I feel like God's called me to, which is literally just to learn how to love people and, again, comfort the people who are afflicted and comfort and confront the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And literally, like, the first step of that was just understanding that God allows things to happen in our lives for a reason and a purpose. And you don't have to know what the next step is. You just have to be willing to fall into the first one.
Yeah.
Because I think on it, like the whole idea of stepping into the first one, I don't know if there was ever a conscious decision of this is how I want my life to go for me personally. Even though I'm driven, it was literally just whatever was set in front of me. I'm just going to do the best that I possibly can, and then figure it out from there.
Yeah.
And if I feel like I need to go in a different direction, I'm probably on some level, one of my faults is being too loyal to something, to where I want to, I want to please people. I want to please my bosses. I want to please the people who are in front of me, but I'll do that to a fault to where I want to do that longer than probably I should at times.
Right.
But again, God even uses those, if you want to call them failures, to be able to grow me. And I mean, your story about disc golf with throwing stuff too, even in the screw ups, I think the beauty of that is the fact that it draws you back to asking God for forgiveness and pulling it back to Him. For sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we view that as a negative of, oh crap, God, I screwed up again. Like, yeah, you did. But
yeah.
We're in communion, like we're talking.
Yeah.
Now, granted, we may not always want the only time we talk to God to be when it's like, oh, well, screwed up there. But the beauty of that is it's still a communicative relationship. Whereas a lot of times I feel like when we don't, or we trust too much in ourselves of, I've got this, I'm not going to curse today, I'm going to be fine, we can do this. Then all of a sudden at the end of the day, I'm like, I made it.
Right.
Like, well, yeah, but in the process of doing that, I lost the communion that I had. I lost the communication because I wasn't continually reminded.
Yeah. Yeah. If I can, I because you're touching on something. I mean, you're touching on two things I absolutely want to address before I lose you today.
Yeah.
Well, one is in a sense, kind of like almost like jumping off a cliff, right? There's something you want to pursue, and people all the time they'll say, especially at church, right? Well, just pray about it, and I'm sure God will reveal it to you. And the answer is no. Get off your butt and go pursue it, and then God will course correct you.
Yep.
You have to take the first step, because the thing is people go all the time, well, let God lead you. And I'm like, yes, that is true, except it's not. And here's why. Because He led us by killing His Son for us. That's what He did. He doesn't owe us anything else. It's not like I'm owed fame, success, wealth, all the things that the artist's dilemma impress upon us, right? This idea that we live in a culture that says if you live a certain way and you pursue your very best self, you as a musician, for example, we spend a ton of time and we work and develop ourselves and turn it into something really, truly beautiful that we deserve because we're believers to have a certain lifestyle. And that's a cultural lie. This idea of success being defined as everything from money and influence to, a gorgeous spouse, a big house, lots of cars, leaving your kids a legacy, of which, that term is overused. And, and then having the world cry when we die. Like I used to joke all the time that, I really feel like I'm going to be famous, and God wants me to be famous. And then when I die, it's going to be like John Lennon, the whole world will mourn, and I'll be remembered in perpetuity. And that, of course, that might happen, but why should it? Meaning, why should I be pursuing a life that is about me? And it doesn't mean I can't live extraordinarily and have a ton of money and all the things. It just can't be about those things. And every artist I know suffers because they are in an inevitable pursuit of something to fill the God-sized hole. And the God-sized hole can only be filled by God.
Yep. 100%.
And that's... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I 100% agree. And that's the problem with many people that I've talked with, and even myself, when I look back at conversations that I've had in my head, of if somebody would just believe in me and pay my way, then I'd be able to go and do this better.
Yeah.
Well, you have to believe that God made you on purpose for a purpose.
Yeah.
So go live and walk inside of that.
Yes.
And don't expect anybody else to understand what God has gifted you with.
Yes.
Everybody is an individual. There's a Mark Lowry joke from a long time ago. Like, if you ever feel down on yourself, just look at your thumb, because everybody's unique, and that means you are thumb buddy.
Yeah. It's another awful dad joke. Oh, dude, you're a cheese ball.
I know. But when we get to the end of our life, like I was thinking about this when you were saying, when we get to the end of our life and when we die, what do we want the reaction to be? And I feel like what I would love for the reaction to be at my funeral, or whenever somebody finds out, Matt Fawcett left this earth.
Right.
What I want the response to be is he finally got where he was going. He finally got to what he was pursuing. Was not something that was tangible in this world, but was to point others to be able to know who Christ is.
Yeah.
Because again, I can't force people, and I love the church. Christ died for her, so I don't want to say anything too bad about her, because he's her bride.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like one of the things we focus on too much is trying to force people into belief instead of allowing people to see who Christ is and allowing the Holy Spirit to do the rest.
Right.
I want people to be able to see that the pursuit of my life is not driving after fortune and fame, but it's driving after serving other people, so they have the opportunity for me to just be a signpost pointing to that it's this way. Like, and you can ignore the signpost as much as you want to. I'm not going to be offended by it. All I know is that God told me, your signpost here, point this direction, and allow others to figure out who I am.
Right.
Like, okay. And if they ask questions, I'll give them directions. I'll point them the best that I possibly can, because I'm flawed. And there are going to be times when I point people the wrong direction on purpose and on accident.
Yeah.
But that's, again, the beauty of doing life together, is figuring out how we all have the opportunity to be able to do that, whether we have an audience or not. I think that's the biggest and craziest thing that I've learned through pursuing music as a career, is just realizing there are some people that I think Mike Donahue from 10th Avenue North had said this, he called it wasted grace. There are times where I'm going to write a song that's literally just for my heart and God, and that's it. And it's just grace wasted upon me for that moment at that time. And there's going to be other times where I'll write a song and play it, and out of everybody who's heard it, everyone's going to hate it, except for the one person who needed to hear it, that allowed them to take a step in a direction that God wanted them to go for that moment. And I need to be okay if that's all my music ever amounts to, is for the handful of people that had to hear it at that moment to be able to continue to walk where God wanted them to move to.
Yeah.
Because you look at a cow when you're talking about the pursuit of what we're doing. The hardest thing to do is to get a cow to start moving. Like, it is, you got to grab the tail. But as soon as it's moving, you know how easy it is to direct it. All you got to do is turn its head.
Yep.
I feel like most of the time when our walk with Christ is, we're sitting there as a cow, just standing in the field, like, God, tell me where I'm supposed to go. He's sitting there like, well, get your butt moving so I can direct you. Like, not saying he's not powerful enough to do it. I would rather work along with the Holy Spirit instead of him having to work in spite of me.
Oh yeah. Wow.
I don't ever want to be the donkey that's sitting there getting the tar beat out of him because I'm not willing to take a step, because it's like, well, you got to prove yourself to me. Like, he already did. He gave you literally the entire Bible. Yeah. He already did everything. He's just asking you to start moving towards him in faith, and he will guide and direct your steps. We're going to make plans. And I think that's the other balance too, is realizing that our plans are going to change. If you make a plan and it's 100% perfect and it goes according to absolutely everything that you planned out, you probably weren't looking around while doing it enough to realize where God wanted to guide and direct you.
Yeah.
And the plan became your God instead of allowing God to continue to shape and mold and form that. But we want to be strict. We want to be in bounds because it's safe. It's where we're going back to our comfortable side of things, to where we want things to feel good instead of allowing them to be uncomfortable, and realize that God's going to grow me in this process just as much as everybody else I get to interact with during it.
Yeah. I love what you just said. It reminds me, it reminds me of pinball. When you shoot the ball up. So I've been trying to think of life like this. You shoot the ball up. The plunger shoots it up to the top of the machine, and it drifts down. And as it drifts down, it bounces off a few things, and then it finds gravity. And that gravity pulls it right towards the middle. And no matter what you do, that ball, a lot of times, is going to go right between the paddles. Yep. And Christ, to me, in my walk, is a lot like that gravity that just says, look, you can bounce all over. I can give you all these gifts, Matt. I can make you so extraordinary that people look at you and they're jealous that how come Matt has all these gifts? How come he's funny, handsome, interesting, super talented, wealthy, all the things that, either people think you are or that you actually are. And yet Christ's gravity ultimately has the power. So what can you do? You can allow yourself to turn towards it. And again, as I had said before, I really do believe it's about you as an individual, or as the case with most of my audience, which is the artist's audience, is how do you let the thing you think is yours go so you can step into the thing you actually are? And that involves gravity.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have something that's going to write your course no matter what.
Yeah.
I think, so my dad's a sailor, and I've picked up a lot from him. But there are certain points of sail that you can sail as far as you want to. There are certain points of sails that no matter what, you're not going anywhere. Doesn't matter how hard the wind is blowing. The only position you may be going is backwards.
Right.
And you've got to have something that's drawing you in. And I think that's the core of every artist needs to have a higher purpose on some level that will continue to draw them in. Otherwise, they're just going to get thrown to and fro all over the place. And that doesn't mean that they're going to continually do everything the same way all the time. Just as in sailing, there's going to be wind changes. There's going to be things that come. And you're going to run out. If you're we sail in lakes all the time. I've never sailed on the ocean before. I think it'd be fun because then all of a sudden you lose a lot of the boundaries. But when sailing on a lake, if you want to get from point A to point B, you're more than likely not going in a straight line.
Right.
You're going to go left. You're going to go right. Across the center. Like, you're going to go back and forth, but you have to be pointed towards a goal of something, or have some sort of higher power that you are listening to, which of course for us is going to be Christ,
right, and
what he said about us and who he is. But you look at a lot of artists that are not believers, and in fact, say that God doesn't exist at all and completely disbelieve that, but they are driven towards some higher purpose or something that they think. A lot of times it's going to be selfishness, of trying to get or attain whatever they possibly can. And at that point in time, your truth, meaning whatever bounds that you set around you, is going to ebb and flow based off of whatever that gravity is,
right,
or whatever that wind change is. And that's why it's so dangerous. And I think a lot of times the reason why God allows most of us to only have a certain level of influence, on some level, is to protect us in our relationship with him.
Yeah.
Because for some people, it literally would destroy them.
Yes. A treasured child. Yep.
Yes. Yep. 100%. And I remind myself of that a lot, is I need to be faithful with what I have and what he's given me, and allow the results, whatever that happens to be here on this world, to be able to be up to him and be okay with that. Because ultimately, like, if I'm chasing after something and I'm neglecting my kids, or I'm neglecting my wife, he specifically has already said and stated in scripture that my first priority is them, and then to serve other people outside of it and allow our family to serve people. So the children he's given me, I can look at as a restrictor plate and look at it as this is absolutely horrible. If I didn't have kids, my wife and I could have traveled the globe. We could have been more free. We could have done this.
Sure.
But just like a restrictor plate in NASCAR, when they put those on there to protect the drivers from going so blazingly fast that all of a sudden death is imminent whenever somebody wrecks.
Yeah.
And God allows restrictor plates in our lives to keep us in bounds and close to him because of his love for us, so that we can actually learn to serve and love and deepen our relationship with him where we are. So if he were to grant us more space or more people or more influence, we now have the groundedness and that gravity that we're trusting and holding on to so much that it's not going to deter or turn us from him.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I don't even need to talk about anything else. That's incredible. What you hit it out of the park, Matt. That's fantastic.
Well, honestly, I can't really take a whole lot of credit for it. I was very blessed growing up that I had a lot of older, wiser men that viewed it as their duty and due diligence to speak truth into my life. And I feel like it's my duty in life to serve other people by making sure that I give everyone the opportunity that I meet and come in contact with, the truth that's been given to me, which is essentially trusting God with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. There were so many, even my father-in-law was speaking well into my life before I ever married my wife. And it was literally because whether I married his daughter or not, because that wasn't even on the table when he and I first met. He was the maintenance director at the camp that I grew up going to as a kid. And then when I worked there on staff, he was speaking into my life then because he wanted to see me as a man of God well before he wanted to see me as his son-in-law. And I think as a man growing up in the United States of America, in this world, I think our mission, again, to our families first, but that should be an outgrowth into our family as the church, and then our family as people who are outside of the church and who we interact with. Our goal should always be helping people as much as possible and guiding and directing them. Because again, the legacy that we leave on this world is going to be more the relationships that we had with people and where we directed them to or pointed them to, more so than the money that we have, the cars that we have, or anything else. There's something much greater and deeper and worth pursuing. And as we pursue Christ, we can't help but try to take as many people along with us on the ride as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to take the same journey. I think, relationship wise, you've got to learn to let people go and learn to love people longer than they want to be loved. And there's a balance there. And again, it looks different all over the place. Sometimes we get too stuck on the 80% that's going to apply to all things instead of realizing that there's 10% on either side of that, that really could speak truth and love to people in a way that is never going to speak to the 80% in the middle. So it just, God has greatly blessed me with older men that thought that it was important, because of what God had impressed on them to speak truth into younger men. And a lot of that was growing up in the church. And I'm ever so thankful for all of them. And I think the best way I can give back to them and show them it mattered to me is by doing that for others.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, you hit this out of the park, man. I mean, look, I wanted to talk about your musical career, and I know we can touch on that a little bit, but I also know we're limited on time. But let me just say this: you have a wisdom to you that's fairly unrivaled. I get it. There's people out there, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your tailpipe, but then this is a common thing when you get in these sort of interviews. You want to sort of prop your guest up a bit and make them feel good about themselves. But the truth is no, we don't know each other that well. I think you're a truly interesting individual, but you said something that I kind of want to distill down just into a simple thing. You're basically saying, don't just lead, invest into others.
100%. Yep.
Dude.
Yeah.
Game over, man.
And that's the thing. An investment takes time. It takes skin in the game. You can't. Anybody can get out in front of a group of people and say we're going this direction and start sprinting ahead. But that doesn't necessarily help all the people that are behind you. Yeah. When I was working in camp ministry, there were a couple of times where we'd take trips with people and we'd have multiple cars all stacked up together, and the person in front, again, because GPS or whatever was expensive to have on your phone, would have the GPS, and everybody else, would be stacked in between. And everybody thought that the person up front was the one leading, which is true. I mean, they were pointing the direction for everybody else, but the person who was in the very back was the one who was making sure that everybody made it there. And that's more the investment thing, because if somebody got a flat tire, somebody needed to stop for gas, the person in the back was the one who had to make sure that everybody made it there. I think far too often we look at the person up front and be like, that's who I want to be. Whereas the more I've lived life, the more I'm like, you know what? I'd rather be the person in the back car, making sure that everybody makes it where we're going. Because we're all going to be at different paces. We're all going to be at different times, but there's got to be somebody that's willing to wrap their arms around whoever's, slowing down, slowing up, and see them in whatever tragedy they may be in, to be able to make sure that they still make it to the finish line at the other end.
What a poor